The text hit my palm like a hammer to glass the exact moment the casket began its slow descent. Not me. 2 words from a number that should have been dust, and the crisp black suit clinging to my shoulders became a costume I couldn't get out of fast enough. The tent above us jittered with rain. People around me breathed on cue, as if grief had a volume knob and the usher had asked us to keep it at a polite 3. My twin would have refused. Jasper laughed at the wrong parts of hymns and debated with clergy about baseball statistics. He wouldn't go out to a careful chorus and the sound of umbrellas. Tessa's fingers closed over mine. No warmth, just pressure, bones lining up with bones. My parents sat nearest the open ground. Father in the silk tie he saved for signing papers. Mother in pearls that flashed like a warning. When the priest pronounced Jasper's full name, Father gave a measured nod as if a clause had been satisfied. Mother's hand went to the clasp at her throat halfway through the prayer. To a stranger it would read as composure. To us it meant distance. Dirt thudded against the lid. Another thud. The phone vibrated again. I'm alive. That's not me. I should have lifted my head. I should have scanned the crowd for anyone else listening to thunder in their pocket. Instead, I slid the phone into my jacket and stared at the rain beating on my polished shoes. We drove home in a procession of taillights and wipers. Tessa glanced over every few miles like she was trying to recalibrate equipment during turbulence. In the mirror, my eyes looked like someone else's, vacant in a way that made strangers turn away in elevators. At the house, she hung coats with efficient kindness, nested saucers under cups, kept her hands busy the way a host does when the room needs tempo. People said, if you need anything, which means please don't test me, and left with casseroles still sweating under foil. The last car door shut near midnight. Tessa organized an already neat room because movement could pretend to be control. You should try to sleep, she said. My body's not listening, I answered, but I lay beside her until her breathing found its practiced rhythm. Then I slid out of bed, dressed by feel, and took the back stairs to keep the old wood from tattling. I drove 2 towns over with the headlights dimmed to where the road only existed one bend at a time. Jasper had rented a studio above a tired locksmith shop whose neon sign had been defectively charming since I was 20. He picked it because no one asked questions and the rent didn't pretend to be anything other than survival. Quiet isn't absence, he used to say. It's permission. The door fought back the way it always had. I hip-checked it open and stood in a room that looked like a hotel marketer's idea of artistic minimalism. No mug rings on the counter. No hoodie on the chair he called his thinking throne. The whiteboard he savaged with lyrics and arrows and expletives had been wiped bare. The cheap guitar stand was empty. The beat-up laptop with faded stickers, gone. The fridge held 2 objects, a jar of mayonnaise and a single beer clinging to the back like a guilty secret. Jasper has hated mayonnaise since we were 7. He would cross the street to avoid it. This was stage dressing for someone else's story. Being born 15 minutes apart makes you fluent in negative space. Every absence in that room shouted. I listened for the wrong echoes, the way the wall hums sounded, the way the floor gave beneath my heel, the angle of light nicking the edges of the old oak dresser we'd rescued from our parents' attic. When we were 8 and our mother did spot checks for contraband gum and off-limits comics, we learned how to carve escape hatches, false bottoms in drawers, decoy outlet covers, a hollow inside a chair leg that once hid our father's cufflinks for a week. I pulled the dresser from the wall, knelt, and ran a fingernail along the outlet cover until the flathead notch bit. The plate popped. Behind it, a clear plastic bag was taped to the drywall. Inside, a burner phone and a scrap of paper with a code in blocky letters I'd known since we could both hold a pencil. Night Fable 42. We invented that style of code the summer we believed we could beat every side-scroller in the thrift store console we scavenged from a yard sale. My breath fogged the cheap glass as I unlocked the burner. 3 contacts lived in it like teeth. Bronze, Lark, Vane. No texts, no call log, no browser. A single video sat in the gallery, helpfully titled Watch_this. I sat on his bare mattress and hit play. Jasper filled the screen too close. Sweat traced the cut under his left eye. Behind him, a smudge of evergreens leaned in wind. He angled the phone, checked the trees, and spoke with each word weighed in his mouth first. If you're seeing this, Rowan, I either came out or I didn't. The show they gave you? Theater. Don't trust Tessa. Don't trust our parents. Start with her. Then ask him about Winter Sage. Air thinned. I scrubbed back 10 seconds to hear the name again. Winter Sage could have been a hiking trail, a perfume, a whiskey, or a military code name. Jasper swiped his mouth with his knuckles, the gesture he used when his mind was outrunning his breath. I found things I wasn't meant to. Schedules, money paths, faces they call numbers. The kind of thing that salts an entire field. That's why I ran. If you're going to pull a stitch, tug hard. And fast. The video cut. No goodbye. No brotherly platitude for the archive. Jasper never offered the enemy an admission. Rain drummed the window like a metronome fighting to keep time. Fear didn't drop me. Something colder spread up my spine. Calm has flavors. This one tasted like a knife held in the mouth. At dawn, I idled outside my parents' house and watched Normal attempt a stage comeback. Their Normal was polished, quiet, insistently precise. The cedar hedge needed trimming by a quarter-inch. The hairline crack near the garage had widened with the last freeze, but Father hadn't repaired it because he respects money more than structure. When I rounded the house, he stood at the grill in the jacket embroidered with Hail and CO, as if he were his own billboard. Smoke blew sideways in the drizzle. He laid patties with surgeon focus. Hungry? He asked to the sizzle. What happened at Winter Sage? I asked. The metal spatula paused midair like it had struck bone. Smoke made his eyes shine. He turned the gas down. His first words were not truth. They were habit. Where did you hear that? Jasper, I said. From under dirt or from the pines? He said the funeral was a set. He said begin with you. He braced both palms on the grill's cold edge, as if the steel could hold him upright. Winter Sage wasn't a base, he said finally. Not on any paper you could subpoena. It was a site. Private dollars, public permission. He asked to go. He signed. Paper made it clean. It wasn't. For what? My voice cracked and forgot to steady itself. What did you walk him into? I don't walk grown men, he snapped out of reflex. He chewed on the lie, spit, and tried again. Logistics. Intake. Moving parts from here to there, and pretending ethics lived in transit. They doted on euphemism, resilience therapy, memory relief. Tetherline if you're wearing a tie. What they did, if you're done with softness, is pair people whose histories fit and teach their nervous systems to lean on each other until each one could be used to move the other. Who signs up to be welded to someone else's pain? He finally met my eyes. It wasn't my father staring back. It was a man who'd drawn a map through a desert and realized he'd sent his sons into a trap. Your brother thought he was fixing himself after the crash, he said, voice narrow. He was tired. He wanted use. He let them cut. It worked until it broke something you only notice when it's gone. He started losing time. He'd call you at 2 in the morning and know you were standing in the kitchen with the fridge open. He could feel your hand before you moved it. That's not real, I said, because disbelief is the last bright railing inside a collapsing stairwell. It is when men with budgets decide it is, he said. They shut the part you can film for a committee. The part they still paid for changed names and went cold. They called the new one mooring. Anchor is for boats. Mooring is for people. You don't resign from mooring. They keep you by your heart. You let them use him. I let. He barked it like a laugh. I stacked crates and signed receipts and told myself a man your age does what a man your age decides. He was an adult. I made introductions. Your mother held the gate. She could tell who would comply. Don't look shocked, Rowan. You learned politeness from her, and I learned denial from me. The spatula smoked where he rested it on the grate. Burgers hissed themselves into charcoal nobody would eat. Names, I said. Files. Anyone who'll answer the phone. I'm not sentimental with paper, he said. They taught me to forget where they demanded and remember what mattered to them. If you say Winter Sage to the wrong ear, you'll hear your phone ring before you put it down, and your front door will be the next thing to speak. He shut the grill, and the sudden quiet made the sparrows feel like a riot. I left without pretending to shake his hand. Tessa was at the dining table with her laptop, answering messages in the voice she uses when she wants a client to feel seen. Her robe never wrinkles. She looked up with accuracy. Coffee, she asked. Later, I said, and went upstairs to pack a bag I refused to call a go bag. I printed Jasper's face, sweat, cut, eyes like wire, and slid it into a folder with names from the burner written in my hand. Bronze, Lark, Vane. When I came down with keys clutched wrong, she leaned against the doorframe. Where? The question wore makeup. North. For how long? until listening gives me instructions. She stepped aside. Her eyes were Winter. The road narrowed until it became a pair of ruts with grass arguing down the middle. Snow clung in the pine's shade like a stubborn suggestion. The mailbox at the turn had no number and a flag that had never been raised. The cabin sat far back with its porch light low, the kind of light people leave on to make the dark honest, not to ward it off. I almost knocked. The door opened before my hand made its decision. "You look enough like him to ruin my afternoon," she said, appraising and exhausted at the same time. "I'm Rowan," I said. "Not a trick." She stepped aside. She didn't smile. The room smelled like lavender and printer toner. One wall was papered the way a storm covers a field. Names. Red thread. Mud maps. Satellite grids. Schedules. Printed truth pinned through wood. "Tea?" she asked. "No." "Sit." Her name was Kira. I'd seen her twice. Once across a bar while Jasper tuned strings and swore at a stubborn peg. Once waiting for dumplings at a night market where she charmed an extra spoonful from a vendor by smiling like gravity. Now her stillness didn't look like calm. It looked like a dam resisting spring. "He's alive," I said. I didn't pretend I believed she hadn't helped him disappear on purpose. She dipped her chin once, as if a private wager had paid enough to count. "Winter Sage?" I asked. "Better than I'd wish," she answered, and flipped open a steel case with latches she handled like a ritual. Memos with seals. Medical logs redacted like someone had used an entire pen trying to keep guilt from bleeding through. Photographs of wrists with tape lines and numbers scrawled in Sharpie. A shot of Jasper in a chair with wires that crawled him like vines. "They recruited me through a shell called Helix Viridian," Kira said. "Behavioral liaison. Compliance assessment. Choose your euphemism. They assigned me to him as a girlfriend because tests were dresses better than lab coats if you call them by the right name." The admission wasn't a confession so much as a receipt she was done hiding. "I kept clean notes until I couldn't sleep," she added, softer. "Then I kept copies. I thought copies might be a lifeline. Copies drew heat." "What did they do?" I asked. "Not in brochure nouns." She laid a scan in front of me. "Electrodes here and here," she said, drawing 2 half-moons behind her ear and temple. "Meds up a ladder I can pronounce in Latin and hate in English. Stress exposures algorithmically timed to weld loyalty to pain. They used your shared history as glue. They called it tetherline when donors wanted their names spelled correctly. The ugly name in the notes is bond fracture metric." I thought of Jasper calling me at hours when the microwave clock glowed 19 minutes past ridiculous to ask, "You thinking coffee or eggs?" and my reflexive jokes about cheeseburgers. I hadn't known someone was listening for our timing. "He found something," Kira said. "During a sync. Not a mirror, more like a map. Another subject. Younger. Off-cycle. A corridor no one told him existed. He followed it into a drive he wasn't supposed to see and walked out with payroll lists, travel logs, and the faces of kids they relabeled as statistics. He took the live drive. I kept the index. She placed a fingernail-sized device on my palm. "He said if your name ever showed up at my door, the real one, not the note on a file, it meant we were out of time." "Where?" She tapped a satellite image. "State Forest. No official trails. A spill of rock that looked like a scar. A rusting fire tower drawn like a rib cage. He let me see the beacon once per day," she said. "He counted on the watchers seeing it, too. Breadcrumbs don't only work for friends. He banked that you would move faster than a committee." "Is this a trap?" "Of course," she said simply. "You're the only variable that decides for whom." She walked me to the door and slid the bolts with a tenderness that felt like muscle memory. "One thing," she added. "He hasn't been Jasper for months. He's whatever part learned to keep going. Talk to that part. Don't ask a ghost for favors. Forest quiet isn't like a room's quiet. A room hushes and waits for your instruction. A forest listens back and takes attendance." I left the truck where the road shouldered into grass and water. The game trail was a rumor. Then even that fell away, and I wove through brush trying not to leave signatures. The shack crouched behind a slope of lichen-coated rock. The door hung from one hinge and looked like it had been considering escape. "Jasper," I said too loud. "It's me." The door shifted enough to admit a body. Not mine. Not the one in the coffin the day before. He stepped out with winter carved into his face. Razor shadow. New scar along the neck. Beard grown during other obligations. Eyes like wire. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice had edges he'd never owned before. You built an invitation, I said. He almost smiled. The almost hurt more than the funeral. Inside, he said, the shack held roofs and air. Bedroll, stove, woodpile, a lockbox small enough to be proof and heavy enough to matter. He knelt, spun the dial the way a man who trusts numbers does, and lifted the lid. 3 drives. A stack of forms bulging with notary stamps. A thick envelope sealed with red tape the exact color of an open wound. This is why they held a funeral with good napkins, he said. He held up a photograph. I looked away as if refusing my eyes oxygen would deny reality. Small body. Tape marks. Lead wires. The curve of a cheek younger than I would allow in any story. How long do we have? I asked, fighting to keep the shape of the question from wobbling. Until the ring closes, he said, tilting his head the way he used to when he was chasing a harmony. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Less. A twig cracked at a distance too heavy for deer. Not a warning. A habit. If you hadn't learned the forest's opinions, you'd call it chance. He didn't. Neither did I. You didn't lead them here, he said, not accusing. I didn't announce anything, I said. It doesn't matter, he said. He kicked aside a loose board and hauled 2 pistols wrapped in oilcloth from their hide. He slid one to me the way you return a family heirloom, without flourish. My grip remembered the quarry where our uncle had taught us circle sight, breath, and the courtesy of safety. Run or write the end, he said. Run where? He nodded toward an ugly gap. Crawlspace dumps behind the rock slide. Tower East quarter mile still carries a whisper if the repeater hasn't died of boredom. And if there's already a hand on the ladder? Then we negotiate in subtitles, he said. Go. The crawlspace packed pines stink into my throat. Splinters and damp earth grabbed at my jacket. I flattened myself and churned forward until the world widened into ferns and chilled air. His hand found my boot and added speed to the meaning. He slid out like a second birth. Left, he said. We moved bent into the green. The shots that found us were soft coats. Hollywood lies about how gunfire sounds. This was polite murder, a professional apology offered mid-breath. The fire tower rose out of the trees like skeletal promise. Paint sloughed off in drifts. The ladder rungs were slick with the last storm's argument. Wind made the girders complain in an old man's throat. Jasper climbed like the only muscle left in him that refused sleep lived in his forearms. I followed. From that height, the world looks honest in a way the ground refuses. Everything trying to be bigger than it is looks small. He dropped onto the platform, pulled a folded geometry from his bag, and began assembling hope. Booster, he said. Line. Battery. Pray, if that's your thing. The laptop woke like it had been waiting for us. He jammed a drive into the port with more faith than force, and the screen poured out a progress bar. Green is a liar. It promises that time is linear and mercy can be measured. What are we sending? I asked, keeping half an eye on the ladder and half on the slice of sky the platform offered. An unpretty ledger, he said. Names under faces. Routes. Times visas became handcuffs. Nobody can deny a hard number when the courtroom wants to pretend it doesn't speak that language. Below us, brush exhaled where it shouldn't. The ladder sang one note, a body's weight announcing itself to metal. He didn't warn me. He pivoted, exhaled, and fired. The sound enclosed us and begged my heartbeat to learn a new time signature. The body hit branches on the way down and thumped the ground in a pattern I will hear on nights I shouldn't. 82%, he said, eyes back on the bar. He looked at me like math should be a comfort. Do we become targets or ghosts when this finishes? I asked. Both, he said. Depends on who's reading. We lay on our bellies and counted the seconds between wind gusts like men who owned patience. Silence flocked. Other footsteps tested the ladder in our absence and decided on the long game. Professionals often win by waiting. Our only weapon against that was a bar turning green. 99. A hesitation to make poets of cowards. The laptop chimed, an absurd, cheerful tone that might as well have been announcing a cake ready in the oven. Complete, it said, like a scoreboard at a Little League game. Stay still, he breathed. We did, until the birds decided the world had returned to normal. If you don't know what relief sounds like, it's every species refusing to coordinate with the others. We climbed down into a day that believed in brightness again and made a wide, unconvincing arc back to the shack. It looked exactly as it had when we left, which made it look like betrayal. We took what proved we had existed and walked away in the opposite direction until the roads remembered their names. Later, in a borrowed car with plates from a state that was busy paying attention to something else, Kira sent a single question mark, and I replied with a photograph of green bars stacked like fence boards. The story didn't explode. It burned fast and sideways, finding dry brush where no one had watered. Forums with fluorescent opinions turned into libraries inside a day. Quiet journalists who'd been collection plates for rumors published with their lawyers' hands on their shoulders. A name trended that no marketer could have dreamed up without swallowing a moral. Tetherfall. My parents' name showed up on page 4 of a thread that refused passive voice. In one picture, father held a clipboard next to a crate stamped with a cereal that matched a shipment a patient had never intended to be. In another, mother smiled in a laminate badge under a title, Intake Coordinator, that sounded so benign you could bleed out under it, and no one would scream. Tessa's photograph surfaced in a trade recess, Behavioral Evaluator for a partner firm, written in pasteurized font. The blurb called it Bond Assessment Under Stress. Her first voicemail arrived 12 hours after the leak. Rowan, please. I didn't know it was like this. The money we needed. I thought we were helping. Call me. I didn't. You don't grant ghosts a reunion tour. Men in charcoal cars came not to drag us into basements, but to hand us phones with 3 numbers and say, answer when these ring. A woman in a red blouse pushed subpoenas across a motel desk and said, you cut the fuse. The fire's no longer yours to choreograph. Her eyes made it clear she would prefer if it were. Indictments moved from rumor to stylized graphics on the evening news. Mid-level engineers who'd listed ethics between Java and leadership on resumes. Colonels who had treated morality like a marketing exercise. Executives who called themselves founders because it sounds like pioneer when you're not brave enough to say profiteer. My mother's license went from active to suspended to gone. My father's club suggested the service gate until they revoked his key. Tessa filed for divorce and asked for the house, the couch, the car, and our wedding china. I signed my name where the tab told me to and let her have the mortgage and the echo. The name wouldn't have fit her. By spring, anonymous donations arrived at clinics that treated people whose lives had become test cases. By summer, lawyers learned how to pronounce parts of what they'd financed. Some of the big names dodged bars and fell into fines and exile. Our system is allergic to treating white-collar harm with the same ferocity as blue-collar theft, but the polite world they'd moved and shunned them in the quiet way that kills men who live on handshakes. A postcard came from no return address with a drawing of a lake, so still the upside-down trees looked more real than the ones above them. 3 words, all lowercase. Enough for now. I pictured Jasper in a cabin the size of a shed with a battery bank he'd wired himself and Beans climbing poles beside it, sleeping because the ladder wasn't rattling anymore. I burned the card and memorized the waterline. I moved to a city where the river made a habit of telling the evening who it belonged to and rented a narrow office over a bakery that opened at 5. I filled a form and paid a fee and named a thing that didn't exist yet, Breakwater Trust. 2 stubborn employees signed on. 1 lawyer who hated bullies and 1 IT ferret who could coax truth out of drives that thought they were dead. We didn't hand out absolution. We handed out witnesses. People came with thumb drives and eyes that said sleep happened to other bodies. We filed affidavits, connected them to journalists whose voicemails had been full for a decade, taught a class of polite agencies how to listen to the part of a sentence that trembles. A production company flew us to a gray building with windows that wouldn't open and asked Nowsoft questions about when we knew. We said no 5 times. We said yes once under conditions that wouldn't make us throw up in the edit. In a studio cold enough to keep meat, a woman in a blazer leaned toward a microphone and asked, "Why did you decide to do this now?" "Because if we stayed quiet," I said, "we were the machine." "Because silence is one of the tools they budgeted for," Jasper said, voice steady. And I didn't want to be line item 12 anymore. When it aired, old classmates who'd once ignored us in hallways sent messages that read like simultaneous confession and souvenir. Politicians pointed stern fingers. Consultants with clean shoes explained that this was a different era, which is how men apologize when they're scared they're next. The email we cared about came at 3 in the morning. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I believe you. No name. No return. I left it alone in my inbox like a candle. The day marshals walked my parents down a driveway they'd measured 4 times before buying the house, a neighbor recorded on her phone right from the safety of the hydrangeas. Mother kept her chin at parade height, as if she were reminding us how posture works. Father looked at the concrete like it might flinch. At arraignment, they pled down from storybook villainy to something the system could metabolize without throwing up. Probation for him when the sentence finished in years, house arrest for her. Money extracted in amounts our friend at the bakery would never see in one place unless he sold the building. I tried to feel vindicated. The feeling took one step toward me and sat down at a polite distance. Grief stood between us and asked for ID at the door. That night, I lay in a motel bed with a blue-tinted ceiling and a heater that coughed every 12 minutes and decided this. Revenge isn't always the cackle you write in your head when someone cuts you off. Sometimes it's a progress bar crawling toward green while men with headsets try to guess how desperate you are. Sometimes it's putting your last name on a document you never wanted to exist so that other people can walk out of rooms you barely survived. On Fridays, I teach high school history again in a charter with scuffed floors and kids who know how to ask questions without thinking they're performing. I tell them history is a ledger of choices made by people who also had to buy groceries, not an answer key. I don't tell them the quiet students are often the ones who know where the knives are kept. I look at the boy in the back row drawing on his sneakers and think of a room above a locksmith shop and a lava lamp that never quite contained itself. Another postcard came with no words, but a number in one corner that matched a grid line and a pencil arrow where a tower would be if you were the kind of person who likes your metaphors literal. I burned it, too, and added the number to the small stack in my head labeled if asked. If you want fireworks, we didn't get them. We got the clean snap of a file unlocking. We got a chorus of birds daring the day to be ordinary again. We got meal receipts submitted by men who said they weren't there. We got apologies from people who wished to clarify that their conscience had been clean until the forms arrived. We got one message that mattered and 3 numbers to call when it was time to tell the truth again. People ask me, sometimes with the breathless awe of the newly converted, sometimes with the tired suspicion of the almost cynical, if I'd go back under those trees had it all been a fever dream. If Jasper hadn't been there. If the coffin had held him, not an arrangement. What kind of brother reads "not me" at the edge of a grave and goes home to microwave leftovers? I would go into the pines until they learned my name, climb a ladder that sways the wrong way in the wind, and put my finger on send. I would do it again if it meant one kid in a clinic somewhere didn't wake up with tape lines on his wrist and a number where a name should be. Revenge burned in the first act, hot and bright, and gone quick. What stayed was something colder and steadier, a ledger balanced, a boundary built, a promise to the part of my brother that didn't make it out. They don't get to write the verb tense on brother without our permission. You expect revenge to taste like smoke. Sometimes it tastes like light. Sometimes it sounds like a tiny chime in a place the wind hates. And sometimes it's the absolute quiet after when you realize the ladder isn't rattling anymore and you get to sleep.